65 acres of raw land, no blueprints finalized, no workers hired, no building in existence like it. And a general walked in and said they had 16 months. Everyone in that room thought he was wrong. He wasn't. What followed was not just construction. It was a controlled explosion of human coordination, one that changed how America thought about speed, scale, and what was actually possible when the stakes were high enough. The Pentagon was not built the way history usually tells it. The real story is stranger, harder, and far more impressive. It was the summer of 1941, and America was nervous. War was spreading across Europe like a slow fire. Washington could feel it getting closer. And the U.S. War Department, the agency responsible for commanding the entire American military, was operating out of 17 different buildings scattered across the capital. 17 buildings, no central command, no unified structure. If something happened, a real crisis, a real attack, the system would collapse under its own confusion. Someone had to fix it. Brigadier General Brehon Somerville was handed the problem on a Thursday afternoon. He was given a weekend to come up with a solution. He came back Monday with a design for the largest office building ever attempted in human history. His superiors looked at the drawings. Some were quietly impressed. Others were deeply skeptical. A building that size, housing 40,000 workers, had never been done before. Not even close. But Somerville wasn't asking for debate. He was asking for approval. He got it. The site chosen was a low-lying swamp in Arlington, Virginia, land considered too unstable, too complicated, and too close to the Potomac River for serious construction. Engineers looked at the ground reports and immediately raised concerns. The soil couldn't support a conventional foundation. Water sat just beneath the surface. In normal circumstances, this land would have been rejected outright. But the timeline didn't allow for normal circumstances. What the engineers came up with to solve the foundation problem was not textbook. It was improvised under pressure, and it worked in a way nobody fully expected. What they did to that ground would become a construction secret for decades. The engineers didn't pour a traditional foundation. They drove thousands of concrete and timber piles deep into the waterlogged ground, forcing them down until they hit something solid enough to hold. It took longer than anyone wanted. It cost more than the original estimates, and it required a level of precision that the timeline made almost impossible. But it held. With the foundation problem solved, the real challenge began. The design itself was unlike anything in American architecture. 5 concentric rings, 5 floors, 5 sides, connected by 10 corridors radiating outward like spokes on a wheel. The geometry was deliberate. It minimized walking distances inside a building so massive that crossing it from one end to the other would take nearly a mile on foot. The chief architect, George Bergstrom, finalized drawings while construction had already started around him. That detail is worth pausing on. Workers were breaking ground before the blueprints were finished. In any normal project, that would be considered reckless. In 1941, with war closing in from every direction, it was considered necessary. At peak construction, 13,000 workers were on site every single day. Trucks moved in and out around the clock. Concrete was poured continuously, not in shifts, but without stopping, because if it dried unevenly, entire sections would have to be torn out and redone. The foreman on site carried radios, not for communication with headquarters, for weather reports, because a single rainstorm at the wrong moment could ruin days of work and weeks of planning in under an hour. And then, in the middle of all of it, the project nearly stopped completely. Not because of weather, not because of engineering, because of a phone call from the White House. The call didn't come with a warning. President Roosevelt had concerns, not about the cost, not about the timeline, about the location. The building as originally designed would sit directly across the Potomac from Washington, and from certain angles, it would block the view of the Capitol's skyline. Roosevelt looked at the plans and decided the site needed to change. Just like that, months of survey work and early groundbreaking were put under review. Somerville didn't argue publicly. He rerouted. He adjusted. The entire site shifted slightly, repositioned to satisfy the president's concern while keeping the core construction momentum alive. But the shift came with a consequence nobody had calculated. The new position placed the building even deeper into problematic terrain. The water table was higher. The ground was softer. The pile-driving crews had to go back in and re-evaluate sections that had already been approved. It added weeks to a project that had no weeks to spare. And yet, the workers didn't slow down. If anything, they accelerated. By early 1942, after Pearl Harbor changed everything, the urgency on that construction site became something almost physical. These weren't just laborers anymore. They understood what the building was for. They knew the country was at war, and that knowledge moved through the workforce like a current. Men worked double shifts voluntarily. Foremen skipped days off. Engineers slept in temporary offices built on the edge of the site. One construction supervisor later said the atmosphere felt less like a job and more like something he couldn't fully describe. But underneath that momentum, a quiet problem was building inside the structure itself. Something in the design, something nobody had caught, was about to create a crisis that threatened the entire interior layout. The problem was the corridors. With the site repositioned and construction accelerating at full speed, the internal navigation system, those 10 radiating hallways designed to connect every ring of the building, had developed a flaw in the spatial calculations. Certain corridors on the lower floors didn't align cleanly with the ones above them. Not by much, a few feet in some places, inches in others. But in a building designed to move 40,000 people efficiently every single day, even small misalignments created bottlenecks, dead ends, sections where the flow of foot traffic would collapse under its own volume. The lead engineers identified the issue during an internal review in late 1942. They had two options: tear out sections already built and redo them correctly, or adapt the design around the error, quietly, without drawing attention to the miscalculation. They chose to adapt. New corridor connections were added. Certain passageways were widened. The internal geometry was adjusted in real time, with workers modifying sections of a building that was simultaneously being finished above and around them. It was construction happening in 3 directions at once. And it worked, mostly. But the adaptation created something unexpected. Certain sections of the Pentagon became genuinely disorienting. Workers who moved in during the final weeks reported getting lost inside a building they had spent months constructing. One facility's supervisor noted that even with a map, some interior sections felt deliberately confusing. They weren't. It was the consequence of a fix applied under pressure. The building was completed on January 15, 1943, 16 months and a handful of days after ground was first broken. But what happened on the very first day of full occupation? That part of the story almost never gets told. On the first day of full occupation, the building swallowed people whole. Not literally, but close enough. The Pentagon, designed to solve confusion, had briefly become the source of it. But within weeks, something shifted. The workers adapted. They developed informal systems, landmark-based navigation, color-coded reference points, word-of-mouth shortcuts passed between colleagues. The building that had seemed impossible to navigate became second nature to the people inside it. And then the full weight of what had been built started to settle in. 17 fragmented buildings replaced by one. A unified command structure now operating under a single roof. Communication that once took hours now took minutes. Decisions that had been delayed by geography were suddenly immediate. The impact on the American war effort was real and measurable. Somerville had been right, not just about the timeline, but about what centralized command could actually do when it functioned the way it was supposed to. The Pentagon still stands today, the largest low-rise office building on Earth, still operational, still housing the core of American military decision-making, built on a swamp, finished ahead of schedule, designed while being constructed, and completed during the most dangerous period in modern history, not despite the pressure, but because of it. If you find stories like this worth your time, the real ones, the ones history doesn't always lead with, consider subscribing. There are more of them waiting.